Good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday Bible study. You're kind of getting a unique behind-the-scenes look today as Abby Counts joins us. And Abby is live streaming kind of behind the scenes, but also in front of you today. If you don't know Abby, Abby is All Saints Director of Communications, and you ought to know what Abby does. Abby does all of the live streaming and the website updates and graphics and weekly communications, emails, and a plethora of things that keep all of us and you connected to one another. Her job has been invaluable in this pandemic, and we're happy to have Abby with us today as Bonnie is attending a funeral today. And today we'll be looking at Philippians 2, 1 to 13. That would be the epistle lesson for the upcoming Sunday. And again, we're glad to have you joining us today. And Paul wrote to the people at Philippi, "If then there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete, be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interest of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God also highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bend, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure." And that is the word of the Lord today. So Abby and I are going to kind of dive in and talk about the themes of Philippians 2, the themes that Paul was addressing to the believers at Philippi, which kind of implies that they were a divided people at that time. They had some kind of division among them, and he was telling them to be of the same mind, of the same spirit, to be compassionate, and to put those qualities of Jesus above everything that would divide them. And he especially lifts up humility. So I thought we'd begin talking about humility. That, to me, seems to be the key theme of this passage. And he uses the example of Jesus, someone who would not exploit his own power, someone who emptied himself to love other people, someone who acted as a servant, someone who was obedient to God, someone who would only be exalted not of his own doing, but by God. So, what stands out to you, Abby?
Well, the first thing I did was kind of go back and read this in the context of the letter. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that stood out to me was I thought that this first part of 1 through 5 was actually in response to Philippians chapter 1, verse 15 through 18, which is, "Some proclaim Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. These proclaim Christ out of love, knowing that I have been put here for the defense of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but intending to increase my suffering in my imprisonment. What does it matter? Just this, that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true, and in that I rejoice. And I think he kind of goes back and says, like, it doesn't matter in the scheme of things, but you should still be humble, still do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility. Yeah.
Right. It's a hard to emulate standard, I think, that he's giving us, but yet it is, with God's help, attainable. And one of the commentaries I looked at kind of made the distinction between imitating Christ and trying to be Christ.
Okay.
And I think that for me, human that I am, it's helpful to think of myself as an imitator and not someone who is trying to be identical to Christ.
Yeah, my initial reaction was, why would you ever try to be exactly like someone else? Because you can't.
Yeah, and you don't want to lose your own autonomy, and that's not what God calls us to. But and at one time in my faith, I had a difficulty with this. Like, I want to be my own individual. I don't know that I want to emulate anyone else. But over time, I've thought about that, and I thought, we imitate people who have had an influence on us, even if we don't know it. Specifically family, parents. We can try all we want to, but their influence on us will always, remain within us somehow, for good and bad. And so why, in that light, it helped me to be okay with the idea of emulating Jesus, of wanting to model qualities, a way of living that he lived and modeled. But I did want to point out too then, how do we balance the concept of self-care with a call to selfless discipleship? If this letter, is lifting up a man who was not only God, but emptied himself, did not exploit the power that he had been given, was obedient to death, they say. If we are called to kind of emulate that selflessness, how do we do that in a way that allows us not to be a doormat, and be abused because we are selfless and kind and giving of ourselves?
Well, I think the biggest thing, as far as not being a doormat, is to be an active participant in what's going on. And not standing by and watching it all happen. I also think when it says, but he emptied himself, I think that's a really important part of it. Not only we can think about it as being selfless, but we can also think about it as sort of in a meditative sense, like you're completely removing yourself from the randomness of the thoughts in your mind, and removing yourself from like what the terrible thing that might have happened yesterday, and then you're being fully present with the people who are around you, and stuff like that. Like, I know in music, that's something you have to do. If you go to perform, you can't think about the note you missed yesterday, or even when you were warming up. Like, you can't think about that at all. You have to empty yourself and just be in the moment, be in the music, and feel it all.
Keep moving ahead. I like that thought a lot. I know that I was telling Abby before we went live today that one of the things I've been taught, I was a chaplain in seminary. Chaplaincy is you have to do a 10-week course in chaplaincy, and you're kind of a chaplain intern, so you don't get paid, but still, I had to be a chaplain at OSU Wexner, and one of the things, both on the floor and in class, that we focused on was self-care, and I think that comes from ministering to people all day who may have a terminal illness, or have some kind of illness that has brought them to the hospital, and is obviously hard not only for them but their family. And then you can, it would be easy to take that home and feel the burden of all these people throughout the day that you met with who were not in a good place at that time. And so we talked a lot about self-care, and it taught me the importance of both being that willing participant, of emptying myself out of compassion, out of the good of being a good, caring human being, because people need love, people need compassion, people need empathy, but still having enough self-differentiation to know where that compassion, not that the compassion ends, but where to kind of allow my own care to come in, where to empty myself, where to kind of allow that to stop and allow my own health to kind of come to the fore.
Yeah, and I figure for every single person it's probably different.
Yeah.
Like coming out of that selfless situation and like reflecting on it and then taking a moment to rest.
Yeah.
And like when Jesus would go somewhere to pray.
Right.
Like, yeah, he was probably praying, but maybe he was resting.
That was self-care for him.
Yeah, everything that was going on.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point, too. As we attempt to emulate and imitate Christ, we need to look at all the aspects of what he did. Even what Paul didn't talk about, that he did get up early and go out on a boat to be alone. He wanted to avoid the crowds that followed him, and that was good and healthy, too. He didn't seem to turn people away when maybe he should have, but it's a hard model to emulate, like we said. But he took time for himself, and as I attempt to be a faithful believer, someone who emulates the ways of Jesus and the ways of loving and living selflessly, I constantly have to remind myself that I can't do it alone, and I need time for myself, and that I'm going to fail at times. And I think when we read a letter from Paul, sometimes it can feel like such a high standard. And I think maybe sometimes people don't even attend church because they feel that they have messed up too much in life, that they're not good enough, that they can't be forgiven, that those people have it all together and I don't. And I think we always have to put out this message of we don't walk the path alone. We will fail. We won't be perfect, but we will be forgiven. So, yeah, what other thoughts do you want to dive into?
Well, on that point, I think it's always good to have goals. Always have something you're striving for.
Right.
Because if you don't, you're not going to grow. You're not going to change. Yeah, but also in verse 12, it says, "Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." So, like, like working on that humility, and, exercising it.
And what's interesting is how 13 follows up to 12. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you. And I love that dichotomy. As Lutherans, we lift that up all the time, but I don't think it can be stated enough that we are called to work on humility. We are called to live as loving, compassionate people who empty ourselves, but we don't do it alone. And so I'm so glad that Paul lays that out in really a black and white way. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And thank God that Paul said that, because I'm the type of individual that would immediately say, I have to work out my own salvation. I can't do that, God. I'm not strong enough. So it's helpful to see it's not only up to you.
But I do think he's very realistic when he says with fear and trembling, because you're not going to do something that's easy if you're working with God.
Right.
You're going to be uncomfortable.
It's kind of like Jacob at the Jabbok in Genesis, the man who, when Jacob wrestled with a kind of a faceless man at night, and that he was wrestling with God and didn't know it. And what happened? He walked away limping. I take that as a metaphor that when you interact with the divine, you're not going to be the same. You're going to walk away changed, possibly limping. So I think that, any time that we embark on a journey with God, a life of faith, the way of imitating Christ, it is something that is not going to be easy. I said that in my sermon on Sunday, that the path of faith is not meant to be easy, and it's a winding, often bumpy path that we walk in life. We don't walk it alone, but it's not going to be easy. So. Well,
and on top of that, can you think of any time where someone has dedicated their life to God and it wasn't worth it?
That's true. And I can't think of any time that someone has been an honest, authentic disciple, and they can say that they've just had a pain-free life.
Yeah.
But it is worth it. The path of faith, it's both beautifully difficult and beautifully rewarding, I think. I've always found my own faith. I thank God for the path that God has put me on. But if I look back on it, it hasn't just been all smooth and rosy and sunny days. I mean, it's been an ebb and flow. It's been, I like to say, mountain peaks and valleys. So, and would you say that about your own life of faith?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But if there were no surprises, I think I would be a little disappointed.
Yeah, life would be boring. Yeah. Definitely. So what are some small practical ways that maybe we can kind of conclude with this thought? How can we emulate Christ daily in ways that both empty ourselves, but also, look out for our own interests too? In a way that we can take care of who we are, but we can also be compassionate, emptying, selfless people.
I think a big thing for me is reaching out to people I love but I haven't talked to for a really long time.
Okay.
Because I know speaking with them and maybe sharing in their grief or troubles, that may be difficult, but I know I'm making them feel better. I'm there for them. I can show them that I'm there for them.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm strengthening that relationship with them. So.
I think about that too. Some days the easy thing is to get lost in work, whether it be at work, at home. And I often too think about, I haven't talked to somebody in a while. I need to call them. And it sounds simple, but it can be tough to stop what you're doing, pick up the phone, and give someone your undivided attention and time. And that is a simple way. I think, too, praying daily for people. I find that some days I pray and it seems to be all about me and my family and my immediate needs. And then sometimes I find the gift of being not thinking about myself and praying for people who I know are kind of having a rough time or dealing with something difficult in their lives. And that's kind of an emptying, too, I think, of myself, of giving them my time in prayer and hoping that whatever I can't do to help them, that God will. So.
But at the same time, you should always take time for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, be a little selfish sometimes.
Be a little selfish, too. I think, again, a life that follows Jesus, if I would sum up how that looks, it's both about being compassionate and empathetic and emptying oneself, putting other people's needs above one's own, but not to the point that you lose your own needs and that you lose your own autonomy, and that you don't give any time to care about you. So it's a fine balance, one that takes all of us a lifetime to work on. But again, we don't work on it alone. We work on it with fear and trembling, knowing that God helps us on the path of faith. Do you have anything else to add, Abby?
That's it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you in a week. We do have worship on Sunday, 2 services at 10, and then an outdoor at 11:30. Go to the website, sign up for that, and we look forward to being with you in the coming days. Have a good week.